When the Night Comes Out presents The Hive, Part 15. Jen felt the iron grip grab her shoulder. How could something so obviously dead have such incredible strength? She felt herself being pulled back into the gym. She could smell them. Hundreds of them piling into the space, and all of them smelling of sulfur and rot. She turned and brought her hand up, smashed the creature that held her right in the face. She sort of recognized the face, but mostly she just saw the teeth. So many teeth, each of them sharp points, and so many that the creature could not even close its mouth. The creature appeared slightly surprised that someone had fought back and staggered backwards. It was enough to loosen the vice-like grip, and Jen stepped backwards, raised her pistol, and fired a single shot into the creature's head. Jen ran for the door again. One of the creatures, still half-dressed in a suit, scrambled across the wall to her right, headed right for her, lines of reddish saliva running from its mouth. Jen fired, got it in the leg, and sent it to the floor, where it immediately started to scramble toward her across the floor. There were more all around her, all of them coming right after her. She pushed through the door and managed to get to the other side, and she slammed the door. To her right was a button set into the wall, and she slammed her hand against it. The door jerked in its frame, and there was a loud metallic sound. It was bolted shut. Jen leaned against the wall opposite the door and sank to the floor, her chest heaving. On the other side of the metal door, there was banging, small handprints left in the metal. She reached for her walkie and pushed for the mic to go live. "Shut the doors, I'm out. Shut the doors," she said, her heart hammered in her chest. She had never felt more terrified and more exhausted. Did I get bit? She quickly did a check. Neck, shoulders, legs, and all up and down. Her clothing had been torn on her shoulder, but there was no blood, no broken skin. Jesus, she thought, and she put her head back against the cold stone. She was alive, but now she was in this corridor. Where the fuck did she go from here? Mike and Dalton headed for the administration building. Reg saluted them both and took several of the men and headed for the gate. Inside his heart and his head, Mike was preparing for the fact most of the people he knew, loved, and trusted were dead or turned into one of those creatures. He could almost see Jen, her teeth now huge and ending in sharp points, coming right at him and having to aim his pistol and fire a bullet through her brain. Then, over the walkie, he heard, "Shut the doors, I'm out. Shut the doors." Relief washed over him, and that was when he indicated to Dalton he needed to head to the building. Reg did not hesitate to head toward the gate and Hive City. The creatures had stopped crawling down the outside of the building, the small contingent apparently dispatched to head for Hive City, for they had all come down and turned the corner. Mike hoped that Carl would be able to hold them for a while. Dear God, let that man remember his training, he thought. Mike and Dalton veered to the left. As they ran, Mike triggered his mic. "Let me in the bottom floor. Dalton, King, myself, and about a dozen others are here with weapons. Open the shield." "Roger that, Mike." There was a rumble, and the black metal shields over the doors and windows on the bottom floor rolled up high enough for Mike, Dalton, and the rest of them to duck under. Then they were inside, and there was pretty much everyone in the entire building standing in the aisles, hallways, and office areas. The men all paused until someone could explain what was happening. Finally, one of Mike's guards, Kevin, ran up, his face slicked with sweat and sprayed with droplets of blood. He looked completely exhausted. "We lured them into the gym, slammed the door," he said, breathless. "It was Jen's idea. We were fighting floor to floor, and then she had the idea to lock them in there, in one place. She led them in there, Mike. She made it through. Jesus, she took charge of the whole thing." "Are they all in the gym? Are the doors holding? Dalton asked. The guard looked slightly horrified to hear Dalton speak and looked at Mike as if for permission. Mike just nodded. Yes, the doors are holding. Kevin finished. Dalton looked around at the people, the offices, everything. That's good for us. We should be able to run in there and eliminate them pretty quickly. You do realize we will need to run in there and they will have to close the doors behind us. Gentlemen, we have to be locked in there and either eliminate all of these creatures or we become part of them and have to stay in there forever. Mike felt the cold chill run down his spine yet again. At this point, he was almost used to it. We understand, Dalton. Mike confirmed. I'll join you. Kevin piped up. I'll head in there if you have enough for me to join. Mike shook his head. I need guards and people who know how to run this prison should anything happen to me. I also need someone to help Jen if that happens, and we have to manage more of these things. You have to prevent them from getting out of there. If we fail, then you need to gas that place or fill it with acid or set the entire goddamn building on fire. They cannot leave. There are already a few hundred that are headed for the gate and trying to get to Hive City. Kevin, who had a wife and child living in the city, went pale. Oh shit, he whispered. Yeah, so let's take care of what's happening here, and then we can try to stop what's happening out there. Mike stared intently at Kevin, and then the rest of the crowd that had already gathered around. No one argued. Time to wipe these guys out, Dalton said. They began to distribute the flamethrowers and the bombs. They'd dive into the fray soon. Carl knelt down in his booth and continued to pray. It was hard to focus. He wanted to leave. He wanted to run, but he knew there was nowhere to run. This was the frustrating part of living here in Hive City. In order to bring as much normalcy to those who lived in Hive City, they made things as realistic as possible. In doing so, it felt very normal after a time, and like one could get in their car and ride off and go for miles and miles. He had dreams of eventually retiring, returning to the surface, getting a place in Florida. The one thing Hive City had not quite perfected was fishing. There was a pond, but it was stocked and too easy. Carl wanted a boat to sit on the water, preferably the ocean, and fish for the big ones. He shook his head. This was no time to be lost in hopes and dreams right now. Right now, there was danger, and everything he wanted to do might end right here. Something began banging on the gate. It was so loud that Carl nearly dropped his rifle. What could be strong enough to do that? The gate was inches thick. There was more pounding, and then even more. It sounded like a riot was breaking out on the other side. There were other sounds, too. Sounds Carl did not want to hear. Things like growling and snarling. Oh, sweet Jesus, he muttered. Then, after what felt like an eternity of hard pounding, snarling, and growling, the sounds all stopped. Then, there was a loud clicking noise. Then, the gate began to open. Oh, please let me shoot straight, Carl muttered. He hit the microphone on his shoulder. They're opening the gate. Everyone get ready. Back at the school, get ready. And if there's anyone on the other side of the door who can help me, then please, get your ass here. Reg felt like he was running in maple syrup. No matter how much he was moving his legs, it was taking forever to get to the gate. Alongside him and behind him, the rest of the men were also running, but it felt as if the gate got further away instead of closer. Already, they were along the side of the admin building, but they still had to round this big curve, and then they would be able to see the gate. Just a little further. Dear God, how things had gotten this fucked up so goddamn fast. It was just yesterday that they had things under control. This was a regular place with as regular a life as one could have while living miles underground and hidden from the sun. They certainly never worked with someone like Dalton King. They managed to get around the curve, and there it was. A giant black metal thing with the little door near the bottom. Crawling all over the bottom of the door were easily 100 of the creatures. It was like looking at a door or wall covered with spiders or roaches or something unspeakable. "We're almost there," he called out, breathless, his heart hammering in his chest. He had not had to run this much for a very long time. His muscles were burning and felt close to total collapse. Then they saw the door in the gate begin to open. "We're out of time," Reg whispered. "God damn it." Alvin Winston hefted the rifle and took his spot against one of the armored plates that had been brought down over the windows. There was a slit in the window here, and he could look out. There were a few areas where people could shoot through the metal plates, but this area was not one of those. He could see his reflection in the glass, and he had never looked so haggard or tired, so scared. Behind him was the cafeteria, and it was filled with people. Most of them were moms holding their children, but there were so many students. There were so many children. At the same time, he had 15 and 16-year-olds all with guns, manning stations should anything come through. He was expecting children to shoot whatever the hell came through the gate. There was a burst of static over the walkies they all wore, and Alvin felt an ice-cold chill run down his spine, and a cold block of ice formed in his gut. "They're opening the gate. Everyone get ready. Back at the school, get ready. And if there's anyone on the other side of the door who can help me, then please, get your ass here." Alvin looked around and nodded at Wendy, the teacher to his right. She immediately began giving orders for people to find places to hide. Meanwhile, Alvin left his spot by the window and headed toward the front of the school. Up there, the metal doors were a mixture of steel and titanium and were 6 inches thick. At one time, they had been much thinner, but when Dalton King came to the prison, they had upgraded in case the man got out or his followers found a way down. The doors were capable of withstanding a massive explosion. But what about flesh-eating, hive-minded demons? Alvin picked up the pace. He could hear feet running up and down the corridors around him. He could hear others barking orders and telling people where to stand, what to do with the guns. Others were to get more ammo and stash it around the shooters. Was there enough medical supplies, and were they capable of handling wounds from dozens of people? Alvin broke into a light jog. In a few minutes, he was at the front. There were 6 students and 4 administrators. All of them stood at small slits in the metal doors, and they held rifles. "Can you see anything yet?" he asked. Jessica, the art teacher, replied, "Nothing visual. We heard noises coming from the gate, then gunfire. I don't know how Carl's going to handle this." Alvin sighed and did a quick check of his rifle. "He'll do better than you think, but this is well past what one man can handle. Get ready. Aim carefully and take shots to the head." They all turned back to their posts. Alvin grabbed his own spot and peered through the opening. There was all of Hive City, the place he had called home for years, the place he had placed all his hopes and dreams. It looked normal, save for the sounds coming from the gate, echoing around the city. Reg finally reached the gate just as the metal door started to open. He dropped his load and slung the homemade flamethrower around. Quickly, he flicked his lighter out and lit the front of the flamethrower. Then he pressed the trigger. With a large whoosh, a stream of flame erupted from the front of the weapon. He was impressed. The others did the same, and soon it went from a stream of fire to a wall of flames that roared across the stone floor and seared the stone walls. They hit the scurrying, crawling mass of demonic creatures covering the back of the gate. They went up like wood. Then they began to shriek. There were at least 100 of them, and 20 went up in flames, but it didn't top them. Instead, the creatures launched at them, flames and all. One of the men to Reg's left was grabbed, and he also went up in flames. The flamethrower tank ruptured, and he exploded into flames. There might have been more than 100. Just like setting fire to an anthill, the creatures began to crawl everywhere. Several of them shot out through the small opening they had managed to create in the gate. Several of them crawled up the gate itself, then across the walls and down toward the men with the flamethrowers. The ones on fire were still up and running, but much slower. Reg grabbed one of the bombs Dalton had made. He twisted the top and threw it, the fuse sputtering and spitting fire. Just before it hit the ground, the bomb exploded. Despite the bomb being relatively small, the explosion echoed off the walls and nearly knocked all of them off their feet. The metal casing broke apart and sheared off several of their heads. "Keep aiming for the heads," Reg called out. "Even with the flamethrowers, we have to stop the brain from working." They all knew there was not a lot of fuel in these flamethrowers. They had to make them count. Reg pulled his pistol and shot each of the creatures still moving despite being engulfed. Each of them fell to the ground and stopped moving. "Getting closer," Reg commanded. "We need to pin them against the gate." "Some of them are going to get through," one of the other guards cried out over the roar of the fire. "And Carl will shoot them down. We gotta winnow down the numbers for him to handle," Reg cried back. Reg hit the trigger again, and the wall of flame erupted like a volcano. Slowly, they began to move forward, hoping to bring these creatures down and stop them from entering Hive City. Carl kept firing, but he knew he was going to run out of ammo. The rifle went first. The last of the magazines he had for reload were now spent. He grabbed his pistol next and kept firing, and the creatures just kept coming out. Then fire erupted from behind the gate. He could see the orange glow and had a moment of hope that this was going to stop them. He almost cheered. Then 4 creatures, all on fire, burst through the opening and headed straight for him. For a moment, Carl was completely taken aback and froze in utter horror. He could see the flesh turning black, even melting right off the bones, but still the creatures kept coming towards him. Their sharp teeth were still visible through the flames. Screaming, not even capable of forming words, Carl fired into the flaming creatures. He did not set up each shot like he should have and fire into their heads. He emptied the clip, then removed it and slapped in a new one, but he had been so focused on the flaming creatures. He had missed that at least 4 of them had run around behind him. He heard something akin to a growl behind him, and Carl whipped his head around and saw them standing there. Up close, they were even more horrifying. Their faces contorted to fit the daggers in their mouth. Saliva, or something akin to it, dripped from their lips. Their eyes were black holes. Carl fired, but his hand shook, and he hit 2 of them in the chest, and neither of them even moved. "No," he whispered. They fell on him, and he did not get another shot off. All the way back at the school, they could hear him screaming as they tore him to pieces. Now, those creatures who had managed to get through, and despite the fire and the bombs, some were still getting through, had nothing between them and the school. All of Hive City was open to them now. First, it would be the city, and they would take as many of the young people hiding in the school. Then, they would head for the lift. It was just a matter of time now. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, The Hive. Tune in next week for The Hive, Part 15. Written by Brian W. Alaspa. Narrated and produced by Ali James. Music by Vivek Abhishek. Catch up on the first 4 seasons of When the Night Comes Out now. Support us on Patreon for more terrifying content.